Okay, so in this video I want to share with you the real reason why borderlines break up with you. So in a previous video I talked about how it's a waste of time to try and communicate and negotiate and convince and rationalize a borderline to get them to understand, whatever the conflict is about. It's a waste of time. In order to do that, they have to have a level of empathy to be able to get inside your skin and listen to what you're saying. And if they don't have that, especially if they're triggered, they won't hear anything you're saying. And even if they do acknowledge it, it does. In other words, if you try and get them to do something later, tomorrow and the next day, it's a waste of time. It won't work. But I want to share with you the real reason why they break up with you. So there's all kinds of things that they do, and all that. We've talked about that. But one of the things that is most frightening for a borderline is emotional intimacy. Real emotional intimacy. I experienced this with my ex-girlfriend, who I believe was a quiet borderline. And what I experienced with her, which confused me, which was that whether it was on the phone or whether it was in person, if we had an interchange, like an emotional exchange, sometimes working through ideas or even problems, maybe really intense lovemaking or sharing of feelings. I'm a very intimate person. I really let all my feelings out. If I've got, I talk about my past and I work through, I'm just all over the place revealing my feelings about things in a positive way. That will create an intimacy. And in my experience, whenever I did that, the next day she'd break up with me. And many of the times that she broke up with me, it would be, I have a bad feeling. It would be nothing more than that. I had the worst dreams of my life last night. Something's wrong. We have to break up. And I believe that that is because borderlines, if they're untreated, do not have a sense of identity. And in order to be truly intimate with somebody, you must have a sense of identity. Now, ironically, the thing that borderlines want the most is emotional intimacy, because that's what they didn't get as little children. So the very thing that attracts them to you is going to be the very thing that will force them to break up with you. And I'm looking back now, and every single time that my girlfriend broke up with me, it was right after we had had an emotional intimacy moment. Interestingly enough, some of the worst fights that we had, she didn't break up with me after those. Sometimes she did, but most of the time it was because we had had an emotional bonding the day or the night before, and then she went to bed and slept, and when she woke up the next day, she had decided that I was wrong for her, or she had a bad feeling, or something in her mind had turned into this. She had remembered a couple of things that I said, and the next thing I know, she's breaking up with me because I'm an unsafe person. And so you need to understand that if you're, with somebody who's not borderline, unless they have other real trauma issues or intimacy issues, which can happen with people who aren't, not just borderlines, but anybody with deep intimacy issues. But normally what happens is that when you share a deep intimate moment, it actually bonds you to them, and the next day they feel stronger and they're more attached to you, and they're more devoted to you than they were the day before. With borderlines, the opposite will happen. And so you need to understand that trying to connect with an untreated borderline through emotional intimacy, even in the moment they may be asking for it and wanting it, if you give it to them, what will very likely happen is that will force something to happen in their emotions and their psyche, which will want to connect to their self to then implant that bonding moment into the self so that the self takes it forward. But if the self isn't there, which is the case with borderlines, that intimacy has no place to go except into the void, that black hole that they're constantly trying to avoid. So in reality, they've come to you because they want your emotional intimacy. They have sensed in you that you have a lot of love to give, and they want that. And after the idealization phase, where now they're not idealizing you anymore, the intimacy actually connects them to their, what would be their true self, but their self identity is not there, and the only thing that they tap into is this huge chasm of insecurity and fear and loneliness and emptiness, and they equate that with being with you, which is partly true. You will create that in them every time you bond with them. They will be forced to feel that. So that's one of the reasons that they seemingly, after you've connected with them, they push you away or break up with you. That's why. So this is again another reason. If you're trying to do normal methods that you would use with non-borderlines that would normally create a stronger connection, you're going to get this catch-22 with them, which will only get worse, which is, on the one hand, when you give them love and attention, they love it. But that very same love and attention will then create tremendous fear and insecurity in them, which will have them push you away. Which, if you're thinking rationally, your response will be to love them even more and give them more love and attention, which they want, and they will receive it, but then again, the pain and the fear will be even stronger, and so it creates this catch-22 of you give more, they push back harder, you give more, they push back harder, and they just keep, this is the cycle, the up and down cycle. Now, when things get bad and they act out and they, destroy the relationship and you leave, I remember this happening numerous times where I was just like, okay, I'm done, fine, I'm done. 2 weeks later, the fear will dissipate and the need for intimacy will arise, and they'll be thinking about you again, and they'll remember how you took care of them, how you loved them, and how good it felt, and they'll seek you out trying to get that feeling again. And then the whole thing starts over. You guys talk it over. You tell them, you did this to me. They said, I'm sorry. I'll never do that again. I'm going to change. I promise. And you say, okay, this time I mean it. And then blah, blah, blah. Well, then we'll do this. And then you work it out. And then you make love. And then, oh my God, we're the best. It was just a problem. We worked through it. And then the next day, bam, they've tossed you aside again. So, again, the bottom line is, if you're with an untreated borderline, it's not going to work. And it's just going to continue to torture you and tear you up. There's nothing you can do. The kindest thing that you can do for an untreated borderline is to tell them that you love them and that you want to be with them more than anything, but the dynamic of the relationship with them having untreated issues makes it impossible for you to stay, and so you're going to leave. You would like to not have any contact with them. Don't have contact with them, because that'll keep the thing going. And say to them, if you decide to get targeted help with a therapist for borderline issues, please give me a call. Here's the number for the therapist. I can't wait to hear your call after you've called the psychologist, and then end the relationship and cut off all contact. That's the kindest thing you can do for them. Okay, that's it.